Hey everyone, this is Carlos. I'm the founder and CEO at Product School, and today I'm here with the VP of Product at Webflow, JC. Welcome, JC.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Carlos.
I'm so happy to have you on the show again. The first time you participated at Product School where you were working at Airbnb, and I'm so happy to see how much you've grown, and now you are a super VP of one of the fastest growing companies.
I remember my time with you. It was really fun being in the auditorium. We're in a very different world now with the pandemic. So now here we are, remote and potentially via podcast. But yeah, it was really fun.
So I'm excited to talk about all things future of product. But before that, the audience is always very interested in learning, how did you get that first PM job?
That's a great question. What's interesting is when I was studying in undergrad, I had no idea what product management actually was. I didn't know it was a role that existed. So I was an econ major. I graduated. I worked in consulting because that's what econ majors do. And after doing that for a little bit, I realized that I didn't want to be on the side of the table that was always advising and recommending. I actually wanted to be on the other side where you were making decisions and you were operating. And so I actually joined as a mobile product manager. So a product manager at a mobile gaming company called Pocket Gems. And that was my first role as a PM.
Okay. And now many years forward, you are a VP of product. So what is a VP of product? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some things that I would consider as constants. Like, these are things I think about on a pretty regular basis, but a lot of your job does really differ based on the time of year, what you're dealing with, what your company's going through. So maybe I can first describe some of the constants, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the things that kind of can change on a quarterly basis. So some of the constants, when you're leading any team, you have to be making time for that team. So I actually lead product and I lead design. And so spending time with both of those functions, really digging deep into, what is our strategy? What are our customers needing, and how do we build and really execute quickly towards building those things, so that we can ship delightful experiences to our users. So that's, I would say, like, just in a nutshell, the constant of the day to day. And then more on a quarterly basis, there are things that change. So for example, 1 quarter ago, we were really sprinting towards our big conference, our NoCode conference. And so a lot of that looks like working with the teams on the launches, working on the keynote, working on the messaging of that conference. Now, as we're going into the new year, we're really thinking about team development. That would look like really thinking through calibrations, working with the team on what expectations really look like. And so it really does. Those are the things that depend a little bit more based on the time of year and what the company needs.
What's interesting that PM roles are typically individual contributors, and some of the skills that help you get there are very different than the skills that will help you become a VP of product. And you were talking about preparing a keynote speech, all levels and team dynamics. How did you acquire those skills to also grow as a leader?
Yeah, I think that there's a big mindset shift actually when the first time you go from being an IC to a manager. And I think that big mindset shift is what I would describe as, instead of trying to do everything yourself, how do you essentially leverage a team in order to accomplish what the company needs? So that's like the first mindset shift. And then there's another mindset shift, I would say, that's a little bit later, where it's less about, just your frontline team, but really thinking about across the company. What are all the things that we could be doing? How do we enable and empower every single function, not just your direct team, to come together and accomplish what you need to accomplish? So I think there are just a couple of different mindset shifts. But at the end of the day, I think being a product manager really does prepare you for leadership, because even if you're a new grad PM, right? Like, you're taught, and it's actually critical to your role, that you can influence without authority. So even if you have no reports, even if it's your first year of being a product manager, you still have to practice that skill of influencing without authority. And so, really through that thing that you will hone every single day as a PM, that is what I think prepares you the most.
Love that, because it's true. Like, PMs lead without authority at first, and in a way that prepares you to lead with authority.
Yes, I mean, that's still a mantra that I think a lot about, which is, if I am making decisions or if people are following my lead because of my authority only, that's a really bad spot to be. Instead, if the reason why people are following you, the reason, like how you lead is because your ideas have the most resonance and they are, most, based on what your users are needing and what your business is needing. In that world, that's where you can actually lead with that influence instead of just your authority. And that's where you can make the best decisions.
So is there anything that's still so core to your values that you do that doesn't scale? I know it's all about empowering teams and make their own decisions, but at the same time, is there anything in particular that you still do that you think it's really important?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot of times when people ask that question, you get the typical answer of, oh, I go in and I really sit on the sales calls or sit in the customer support calls. And those are things, I do and I care about. But at the end of the day, my philosophy here is the following, which is you should be able to go into the details and roll up your sleeves in whatever it is as a leader, but you should have created the systems so that you do not need to do that. So if you need to, because something is broken somewhere, then you can. So that's the part that quote unquote doesn't scale. So you roll up your hands, you roll up your sleeves, you get into the PRD or the spec, whatever you call your product requirements document, right? You roll up your hands, you're able to like really understand, hey, technically, is this feasible? Partnering with an engineer, is this the right user experience? Like you can roll up your hands and do all of those things whenever you need to, but you've hired a team, you created the systems and the processes so that you do not have to be doing that. And that is a sign of like you actually scaling. So I'm giving you a slightly different answer to your question, which is like, what are the things that I do that do not scale? If I need to, any of the following things, right? Because you have to troubleshoot all of those things in order to move your organization forward. But should I be doing anything? No, because then I've not properly scaled myself. Like, should I be doing any of those specific things?
And I agree, I think that's a good point. I think that creating the process, sometimes it's a good sign to not have to do an unscalable thing again. But another thing that I've seen a lot of product leaders do is to focus on recruiting, because it gets to a point. I mean, your company, what is the status of your company, by the way?
In terms of the number of employees?
Yeah, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so we are a little over 300 people. We are hiring and growing. So again, reach out to me if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, so when it comes to recruiting, 100% is something I still spend a lot of my time doing. One of the things I actually do, it's very important to me, is I do a lot of sell calls with both folks who are joining either product or design, but also across the company. And this is the thing, again, there are some product leaders out there who are like, I interview every single PM, I interview every single, so like whatever X role it is for their team. My philosophy here is I am not the veto. Like I would like to empower my team to be making great hiring decisions. I've hired great people so that they can make those great hiring decisions, but I am always available to help talk to that candidate, to answer any questions for that candidate, because and that is something that, again, is not super scalable, because whenever a hiring manager wants to leverage Jay-Z, they just need to ping me, but it's something that is very important. And the reason I do it is because, well, first of all, when you have a 30-minute conversation with a candidate, just hearing their questions tells you a lot about what motivates them, tells you a lot about how they think and how they problem solve. But also, I do think, one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to hire the right people. And so making sure that I'm available for my team in order to essentially bring in the best people, that's something that's very important to me.
And one trend we've noticed over the years is that there's a lot of diversity in product, much more than before. Back in the day, there were a lot of like software engineers or maybe like MBA students trying to take over most of those product roles. And while that, those roles, those sources are really powerful, we've seen designers, we've seen analysts, we've seen people from ops, marketing, all walks of earth. So now that you're in a position to also give that opportunity to others, like what are some of the characteristics that you focus on when interviewing product candidates?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have actually transitioned, I think probably a person of every function into the product role. So when you mentioned designer, engineer, analyst, ops, support, all of those people I have definitely worked with. At the end of the day, the biggest thing I look for two things. The first one is, can you approach problems from a first principled way, can you actually break down a problem space and really be able to understand what your users need, and also is there an opportunity here for the business? So I really look for that structured thinking. Then I also, and the second one is harder, just to suss out in an interview, but you can really dig into people's experiences to get a sense of accountability. At the end of the day, a PM, regardless of, we talked earlier about your lack of authority, all of these things, but at the end of the day, you still are accountable for the outcome. So making sure that whoever is interviewing for that product role, whoever's transitioning into that product role, to feel that deep sense of accountability to our users, to the business, and to their teams to essentially deliver the best product possible, that's huge.
And PMs are always curious. That's another thing I've noticed, regardless of the title, years of experience. I always like to ask Roberto's question to you and ask, even if you are at a VP level position, what are you curious about learning these days, and how do you make time for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am always curious. I angel invest as a way to, first and foremost, just to give back, partnering with founders, but also very selfishly, it's a great way for me to learn, right? While being helpful, how do I really learn about new trends or things happening in the industry, or what people are finding opportunities in? And so it's definitely something that, being able to learn. Again, I don't have a specific industry that I'm most curious about. I think that's maybe a sign of a generalist, and also true for many PMs. There are many, many things that I am curious about. And so that is definitely one way that I'm able to keep learning.
Yeah, I mean, having skin in the game, it's super powerful. And investing in companies, I've seen people doing training, doing coaching, but as long as they put block time on their calendar to prioritize learning, I think that's the most important thing.
The other thing I am learning is, for full transparency, is I am a new mom. So I have a year and a half, basically an 18-month-old. And so just learning in terms of how to become a new parent, what that looks like. I have so much respect for all the parents out there. I know, Carlos, you have two. And so that is definitely something I'm also just spending a lot of cycles learning. And I do think it is actually a luxury, this concept of other time that you can do outside of your job, outside of being a parent, and just learning for learning's sake. It is hard. So I just want to acknowledge that for all the parents out there.
Well, thank you. Your company Webflow it's really powerful, especially during these times, because it's empowering people to create without code. So let's talk about a little more about that. What does your company do, and what is this no-code movement all about?
Yes, of course. Webflow, our mission is to empower everyone to create for the web. And like you said, it is really, really powerful right now in the pandemic, but also just for the future. And I'll talk specifically first about the pandemic. We actually have lots of users who previously were a Lyft driver or an Uber driver. And during the pandemic, especially during the first many months of it, they weren't able to do that anymore. They weren't able to make what they were before. And then as they, thought, what can I do? What can I do in order to essentially make that income? Learning Webflow and becoming essentially like a service provider, like a creator. They've been able to, make more in 1 month building with Webflow for clients. And they could have made before, 4 months driving with Lyft. And that's actually, true and something that we heard a lot of from some of our users at the beginning of the pandemic. But, more than just think about the future is more and more online. It's more digital. And regardless, even again, of the pandemic, I think the reality is that everyone's going to have an online presence. Any company, any individual, any organization. And so what we're here to do, what Webflow is here to do, is to basically provide the world's most powerful visual development platform so that you can use our platform, essentially create anything that you need and want. And that's just so dear to my heart, being someone who was not a computer science major in undergrad, who did feel like there was a huge barrier to being able to create for the web. This product is for all the people out there who are trying to learn about what does it mean to build for the internet, who are trying to do it and actually create. So that's why I'm so excited about Webflow, and that's our mission and vision for the world.
I'm a user. In true product fashion, I can totally see different personas. You mentioned someone who's using that for a living. Let's talk about the product managers. Do you see product managers using your product? And if so, what are some of those use cases?
Yeah. There are so many use cases for Webflow, but maybe I'll talk about a couple that are specific to project management. If you're a brand new PM, if you are not technical, but you're really craving to learn more, like how does the internet work? Like how does CSS work and HTML work? You can actually go to basically you can go to Webflow University and learn about computer science with Webflow, which I think is pretty astounding and pretty amazing. So that's one use case, just as a learning tool. Another use case is for when you need to get something out there. You are launching something and you want a landing page for your new feature or your new product line. You can build that very, very easily with Webflow. Marketing teams are some of our biggest users because what they want is that beautiful customized design, but they don't have all the resources, all the engineering resources in order to do that. And so with Webflow, you can circumvent all of that and essentially do it yourself with just design skills and learning Webflow. So that's another use case. And the final use case is more in the prototyping space, where you're like, I'm not really sure, like I have a startup idea, or even I'm working at a company in PM. I'm really trying to iterate on what the landing page looks like, or the just the website, or even like a feature for my product. You can use Webflow to actually prototype.
So I think of NoCode as a visual layer on top of a lot of technology that allows pretty much anyone to build without really needing to know all the specifics. At the same time, there's a lot of products out there that are pretty technical, right? And I don't want people to think that engineers are going to disappear and everything is about no code. So how do you see those two worlds working together?
Yes. So we believe very much in partnering with that engineer, and essentially a lot of developers are our biggest champions, because what they realize is they're like, wow, I could be asked to pixel push and I could be asked to do this landing page, but instead, myself and a designer, or even just a designer over time, they can do that work that I would be spending months on. They can do it very quickly and they can be empowered to do so. So I don't see a world where we're replacing the developer. I see a world where we're complementing the developer and freeing up the developer to do the things that they actually want to spend their time doing, right? Like you, as a developer or an engineer, you want to be solving hard technical problems. You don't want to be working on the marketing website. You want to be working on some of the back end stuff, some of the ML stuff. Like that's what we want to free you up to do. And so our product, in my mind, is very complementary to the developer persona. And in fact, the developer persona is one of the biggest champions for bringing Webflow into an organization.
That's a great perspective. I actually started thinking about the product-led growth mindset that became more mainstream in recent years. And it's not about replacing salespeople. In a way, salespeople are also huge champions because they want to focus on big custom deals and make sure that the direct revenue, that the self-serve product can take care of more the low-hanging fruit.
Yes, 100%. The best businesses out there have this amazing self-serve motion that it just works. And, like the core product has such great product market fit that self-serve motion is really strong. Then on top of that, you layer in that sales assist motion, where it's very clear that, hey, these are the types of deals that need this type of SLA, this type of dedicated support. And by the way, the size of the deal, the actual, ACV of that deal, it supports actually having salespeople who are obviously more expensive. And so having both of those, that really strong self-serve motion, bottoms up motion, and that self-assist layered on top of it, that's really what, that's what Webflow has. And that's like, that's the model of the best product-led companies that are also operating in that enterprise space.
Let's talk about that, because I remember when Webflow started, it was mostly a B2C product, right, like for the end consumer. And now it's evolved and it has both the B2C component and the enterprise component that you just mentioned. So for a VP of product, how do you go about making sure that you have the right roadmap and that both initiatives, both business units are thriving?
Yes. So first of all, I think the first concept I share is this idea of like, you really want to be building in that Venn diagram. So the intersection of those two circles, where it is what the larger enterprises need, but also what smaller businesses, potential freelancers, they need. You want to be building in that Venn diagram because you don't want to be, for example, forsaking the smaller businesses for the sake of enterprises. We believe very, very strongly in having a very vibrant, robust community that serves, and our mission is to serve everyone, right? And so that is the first principle we think a lot about. What does that Venn diagram look like? Then I think we need to be really clear on what is our portfolio approach to investment. How do we build the most important table stakes features and it basically enable these larger companies? And then what are the other things that some of our other segments might need? So that is the next exercise that we do. And I think in general, one of the beauties of Webflow is that typically what empowers one segment also empowers the other. And the reason for that is because a lot of times for example, our service providers, right? A lot of people who do use Webflow today, who usually go through our self-serve motion, they actually want to serve enterprises as their end businesses. And so we have this really beautiful, when we look at that Venn diagram, they're actually quite similar as opposed to, different, which is true for some other companies, because at the end of the day, what our service providers want is very similar to our end users and vice versa.
So I'm thinking about your own product org chart, right? Like, do you think about, like, do you have like different PMs leading those initiatives, or how do you kind of build your own product org chart?
Yes. I'm a strong believer in that your org needs to reflect your strategy. And one of the best ways to build empowered teams is to enable, to be clear on your strategy, to have an org that reflects it, and to make decisions on investment that really reflect all of the above. And so I've actually structured our EPD team to really reflect the fact that we do believe in different investment areas, like investing in an enterprise, but also investing in our core capabilities for everyone, as well as even enabling a thriving ecosystem. So our org structure, we have essentially like 5 pillars, and those 5 pillars reflect what we believe is important to invest in as a company.
So as you think about the future of no-code movement, what are some of the trends that you can identify?
Yeah. I mean, no code in many ways has permeated a lot of industries. It no longer is just like a small movement, that we were leading. It is something that a lot of industries are realizing, hey, this is the best way to empower users and essentially, provide something that people need. And so just in general, I believe that no code is essentially going to continue to grow. It is just the way people should be building. Instead of spending all of your energy doing something over and over again, why don't you build a no-code solution, empower everyone to be able to do that, and have access, right? But I do think that there is going to be a little bit of okay, well, what do you use each tool for? And then how do we start to essentially think about the connection of these no-code tools in order to achieve what we need to achieve. And so that's a lot of what we are thinking about as a company, which is how do we make it a seamless user experience for you? Like if you need a beautiful design, but you also need, you have a lot of data and you need a great CMS, right? And you need some e-commerce functionality. How do we give you all the building blocks you need so you don't feel like you have to clobber together solutions? And then in certain places where it does make sense to really have these no-code solutions be coupled together, how do we create elegant ways for you to essentially seamlessly integrate and use those other solutions? So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing, which is it is growing. It's a growing trend. Being the platform of choice where you don't have to have a janky kind of glued together solution is going to be very increasingly important, but then also being thoughtful on where do you actually want to have that partnership with another no-code solution so that the user can achieve what they want to do seamlessly.
And I heard you talk about community before, and I know that the Webflow community is big. They share the creation. So how do you think of community? How do you leverage them to influence your own roadmap?
Yeah, community is incredibly important to Webflow. We would not be where we are without our community. In many ways, we like to think of ourselves as we're a community first company that happens to have a series of products that our community really loves, as opposed to, hey, we're just a product and there's a community around it. So what we do with our community, we really are committed to engaging with them, investing more in that touch point, really being able to hear what our community wants and needs and being able to respond to that. Our community, especially our freelancers or our professional creators, they're some of the most they're the best users in terms of giving us feedback, right? That they can say, hey, I need this in order to essentially serve some of these enterprises over here, or this is really important for me to be able to create websites at scale. So our community is incredibly important, both from a giving us feedback perspective, but also for us to really know what's next.
So, JC, as we come to the end of this interview, I always like to wrap up by asking, so if you were to give advice to your younger self, what would you have done differently in order to get to where you are a little bit faster?
That's an interesting question. I honestly don't know this concept of like getting to where you want to go faster. I think I kind of want to turn that on its head a little bit, because at the end of the day, the advice that I actually would give is like lean into what you're passionate about and just be more attuned to what doesn't give you energy. And that doesn't actually get anyone in my head like to a specific destination faster. It just makes it just ensures that where you want to be going is actually what you enjoy, and that the ride and that the journey itself is something that you are growing from, and that you're actually learning a lot from, and you're just happy with. And so I don't know if I would give myself necessarily any specific piece of advice to get from point A to point B faster, but I actually almost say there isn't really a clear point B. Everyone's point B or C or D could look very different. But instead, if you really focus on what gives you energy, what makes you feel like you're in a state of expansion and like that you can take on the world, lean into that, and then be really aware of the things that don't give you that energy, and either make a call and like, this is what I'm not going to do, and that's how I'm going to show up, or figure out how to create leverage, right? So how do you, if you don't want to do that particular thing, what is it that you're going to do with your team, or with the complements to your role, to ensure that work still gets done, even if it's something that doesn't give you energy.
That was beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to learn from you.
Of course. It was so great to see you again, Carlos, and to spend time with this group.